Well, welcome to another episode of Cranes and All. And what I'm going to do now is drive down to Queenstown and get on board the Earnslaw. They've got a derrick on board the Earnslaw that's been there since they built the thing in 1912. And it was a fair while ago. And we'll watch them operate this thing with a steam winch. And they lift a big block of concrete around to balance the ship when they're loading coal. But before we do that, we're going to go to America. We went there in 2016 and we looked at this enormous drag line. You might remember last week we spoke to old Sid Hogg operating his two drag lines that he uses to keep the canals free of silt. And yeah, it was quite interesting. And while I'm down in Queenstown, I'm going to do a bit of four-wheel driving. So that'll be on in due course, so watch out for that. So, Queenstown, here we come. Bucyrus Airy built this enormous drag line in 1965. Most of these machines are electric, and that means nice and quiet for the operator. This one's about 4,000 tonnes, and the bucket can hold 65 yards of coal in this case. This machine walks itself to the various positions where it can throw the bucket out and drag in more coal. But there's never been anything like this in New Zealand, but popular in the mines in the USA and Australia. We were lucky to get to see this one because it's pretty much a museum piece these days. Nonetheless, very impressive all the same. Before we get to Queenstown and the Earnslaw, here's an old photograph taken of the Auckland waterfront in 1908. It's a photograph of a mechanical crane that was working down there at the time. Note the two men working a crank handle on the side of the crane to raise the box to be loaded onto the cart in front of it. Not many cars and trucks around in Auckland in 1908, but plenty of horses and carts. Note the sailing ships as well. This is all happening more or less at the bottom of Queen Street. Note the principle of the crane is pretty much like they are today. The Earnslaw has a steam winch on board to do its lifting, and you'll see that working shortly. But what a great photograph of times gone by. So the young lady's getting the winch ready to, we're going to lift the big block that'll counterweight the boat when they load up the coal. And so there's a rope being loosened. And you're going to undo the hook and hook it up. That's the windlass.
Yep.
And it's going to...
Going up right now. And what's going on is it wants to go that way,
Oh,
so we've got to stop it from going that way.
Right. So you're lifting and pulling.
Pulling it across.
Yep.
Okay, what's going on now is it was still not trim. So, but we don't want the concrete block right against those rails here, because Mum and Dad put their little children up on the concrete block by the rails, and you've got to growl at them. So by keeping the concrete block there, you don't have to growl at anybody.
Fair enough.
So, but what I'm going to do now is the boom goes right across here to try and get a bit more trim, and away we go. Okay, so what's going on there now is we want to tie this in. So, okay, so I'm going to go up here, rightio. Okay, right, let him go. You always lose some. Right, and that's the process.
Awesome.
One other thing too, and this is just me, this is an old superstition. Old superstition, you always coil your ropes on a boat clockwise.
Oh, okay.
Clockwise. And it's bad luck. You're a bloody fisherman.
Yeah,
you should know that one.
Oh, yeah.
You're a bloody, and you know where the do you know where it came from? My understanding where the superstition came from? No. Is actually the thread of the rope is easier to coil clockwise and anti-clockwise.
There you go.
And that's all it is. That's my understanding. But don't put that on camera, because somebody might correct me.
Yeah, well, yeah, well, we've been corrected.
Yeah.
So this was built in 1912.
Yeah, yeah.
And these machines came with it?
Oh yeah, very much so. These winching, the winch and the capstan, they come out from England. Oh. Okay, you could buy those off the shelf, just like you buy parts for Japanese cars back in those days for this kind of stuff. The main engines for the Earnslaw were actually built by the shipbuilder himself.
That's a triple expansion.
Pardon, triple expansion, yeah. But these parts you could buy off the shelf.
Fair enough.
Mind you probably had to order about a year ahead.
Yeah.
Back in those days.
Yeah.
And if you notice, there's also another one down the stern. one of those,
Yep.
which is redundant. And my understanding is, I don't think there's any other vessels operating commercially in New Zealand with this kind of winching arrangement. They've all got the modern cranes now.
Yeah, we did a story on the Hikatea, which was built in 1926, and that's got a lot of steam machinery to drive their crane.
Yeah, right. So they got a similar arrangement with the mast and the boom and all that kind of carry on. Okay, right. Yeah.
Mind you, the boom's a lot bigger than that, but this is 1912. I mean, this is probably the right up to date with cranes.
The mast and the boom, they're not the originals.
Oh, okay.
No, the original mast was a wooden mast, and it was replaced about 1970.
Oh, okay.
And then the steel one came in here in the mid-90s, and one of the reasons behind that was the knowledge was lost by the authorities to be able to certify that piece of wood was safe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Now, in saying that, my understanding is some of the modern super yachts use wooden masts, but they're laminated and hollow. That's a whole different. That's a whole different piece of technology. Yeah. But that's the reason why we got to finish up with steel mast. Is nobody could certify the wooden mast is safe.
So this little pipe, is that where the steam's coming?
Yeah. It obviously starts off in the engine room, and there's right below there. There's a valve that we turn on and turn off, because here's another thing that happens is kids come along and play with this, so we've got to isolate everything. And but the steam's down there. Yeah.
Sure.
We operate on 160 pounds of steam. This needs 50 pounds to lift.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, it just needs 50 pounds.
So how long you have to replace the wire rope much?
No, not that much. Last time it was replaced was due to operational error. we actually put a kink in it. Oh. We got a kink in it, and they weren't too happy with that one, so we'll say no more.
Fair enough. Right. Yeah. But if you can smell this, folks, this smells like 1920. Yeah. This has sort of got that, you go and sort of stand next to a traction engine, it smells like this. Amazing. Excellent.
It is an amazing piece of machinery. About every 3 years, I think, they pull it apart and have a look inside it.
Yep. Just
to make sure. Yeah.
So they tell me this was built the same year as the Titanic. Mind you, this is still floating, that isn't?
Yeah. The Titanic, Easter 1912. This one was launched in February 1912.
Oh, okay. So it's a little bit older. Mind you, the Titanic would have been launched long before that, because she would have had to be fitted out. Oh, right.
She would have had to be fitted out. Yeah.
So they tell me this came in pieces, that they sort of chopped it up and sent it out here in bits.
It was a kit set, basically. Now, if you go down onto the lower deck, and we've got a forecastle museum there, and against the wall of the forecastle there, all the metal has gone back to bare metal, and you can see the numberings and the letters from 1912.
How to put it back together.
How they put it back together. It's only that area down there that we've exposed, because we can keep that in good condition.
Can you tell me who owned it first?
It was the railways.
Oh, the New Zealand Railways. They had it right from the start.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah. They had not a station, but they had a rail centre here. Back in the early days, there were about, my understanding, there were about 2 private companies operating. A lot of controversy over the service that they were providing.
Yep.
So the railway stepped in and took over the companies before the 1900s. I don't know the exact date.
Right.
And then they operated with these older boats, the smaller boats for a wee while. But then the demand was for the Earnslaw. So in 1912, the railways had the Earnslaw built and constructed.
Has this been under threat? Like people want to say it's gone past its use by date, get rid of it?
About 1968 was when the government decided they couldn't afford to keep it running. The railways couldn't afford to keep it running, and there was quite a bit going on then around what they're going to do with it.
Yep.
And this is my understanding, 3 Auckland businessmen took over a lease for it for a year. They couldn't make a go of it. So then a Real New Zealand's predecessor company, they've had a few name changes since,
Sure.
Field and Travel, they started operating it. And this is a very simplified version of basically what happened. Is being a railways vessel, it had to provide a service. Can you remember right around the countryside all those bus services that the railways put back in the early days? But nobody used them. But every time
they went anyway.
Yeah, they went anyway. And every time the railways wanted to stop the service because it wasn't paying, there'll be an uproar.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And this is pretty much what was going.
Right.
Yeah. So it had to provide the service.
So down the way they've got the Kingston Flyer, which is sort of similar sort of, is it working, is it not working at the moment? I don't think it is, but in its day it was probably making a few bob.
Yeah, look, the Flyer, my understanding is the Flyer has been fired up recently, and it's, well, look, I don't know who owns it now, but I know one of the engineers down there, he actually works on here, and he's involved with a little bit of restoration with the Flyer.
Yep.
And she has operated. I think a couple of weeks ago she might have even done a trip.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
But not for it was more sort of a charter type of thing. A lot of private people got together.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, good day. Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Tadano have been building cranes since 1956. Tadano is the name in mobile cranes, from 2-axle to 7-axle cranes, as well as track cranes. Tadano, a great choice of crane. So if you're looking for a crane, why not choose Tadano? Tried and true. To find out more, just go to allcrane.co.nz. With me is Tim Elliott from Kepler Motors in Hamilton. And good on you, Tim.
See you.
Maybe tell us a little bit about the vehicles you sell.
Right, well, we've got an absolutely amazing range from the GWM Haval product lineup. We start with a small SUV with the Jolian, and we start from that at $27,990 plus on-road costs. We then go through that range. We have 3 models in the Jolian range. We then go into the H6, which is the next size up, your mid-size SUV, and that we actually have 5 models in that range.
Wow.
Yeah, starting from $33,990.
Yeah.
So when you look at the value for money in our range, and we even have right through to a hybrid like our new car behind me here. As well as the SUVs, we have a stunning lineup of the GWM Cannon, which is New Zealand Autocar Magazine's Ute of the Year for 2020.
Wow.
Not only has it come up Ute of the Year because of its build quality, ride quality and safety, now 5-star safety rating in 2021. It is an absolutely amazing package. You don't get the harsh ride that you traditionally get in a ute, but you get all the safety and benefit of having 3-ton towing capacity, up to a ton payload in the back, but also room for your guests in the back of the vehicle if you're taking a few along with you.
With a bit of leg room.
With a bit of leg room and vents in the back so they have actually get a bit of fresh air as well.
Oh, that's marvellous. Get hold of Tim and I'm sure he'll look after you.
Look forward to hearing from you.
Fassi, an extraordinary crane manufactured in Italy. The amazing breadth of the Fassi range with over 30 models and 300,000 configurations means the cranes offered can be truly purpose-built, tailor-made to suit the needs of the customer who chooses Fassi products mainly for their quality and fittings. So when choosing...
Well, good afternoon everybody. RNZ welcomes you on board the Earnslaw. Our trip takes us across to the western shores of the lake, and we'll cruise up the western shores as far as Walter Peak. At Walter Peak, quite a few of our passengers are going ashore over there. Those people who have purchased tickets for the farm tour or the barbecued lunch, you'll disembark at Walter Peak. Now we have quite a few youngsters on board the vessel today. We do expect the parents to look after them.
Well, seeing we're on Earnslaw, it would be rude not to take a trip over to Walter Peak. And besides, it's camera person's Linda's birthday today, so what better excuse?
Yeah, well folks, almost onside the wharf here at Walter Peak. But once the vessel is secure, gangway to disembark will be on the top deck by the cafe.
The Jekko mini crane, without riggers, designed to get into small areas and confined places, like stairs, passageways, things like that. Because they don't have a huge setup time, this saves money and time. Jekko, the crane that does all those little jobs in tight places. For more information, check out www.allcrane.co.nz. With me is David Sales, and David, welcome to our little show.
Thank you, Bill.
And David is probably one of the longest serving crane drivers in the country. He's been doing it all his life. He's 76 years old. And David, how did you get into this in the first place? I mean, you know, when was your first contact with a crane?
Well, when I was 15,
15?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was a bit young to be working in the crane industry, but I got a job of picking up potatoes because I didn't want to work at home for nothing. And it was that hard of work that I went and seen a company in Palmerston North, the Richard Drilling Company. And they said I was too young, come back when I was 18, but I pleaded with them that I could even make cups of tea if they wanted it. So,
sweep the floor, do anything.
And so they said, well, we'll give you a month's trial. And that month turned into 2 months and 3 months. And by the time I'd been there 10 years, they said I could be there permanent.
So done your trial.
So after 29 years, and a couple of generations of the family that I was working for, it was a family business, I bought my own crane back in 1989, and after doing the Wairau Bridge. And
is that the Wairau Bridge in Wairau?
No,
Wairau.
Oh,
Wairau. Oh,
yeah. Up at Hawke's Bay. And
did that get washed away in one of those
yes,
floods?
it did. It got in Boulder Storm.
Right,
And
yeah, of course.
And I believe the bridge that we did that's now standing today is probably about the third bridge built over the years there.
Wow.
So after that job, I actually bought my first little hydraulic crane, and I actually swapped that. I worked all my life for a brand new car, a VN Commodore. I only had it a little while, and after I finished the job at Wairau, I went back up there and to have a look at this crane that was for sale. And I rang the wife up and said, well, we haven't got a new car anymore. And she thought I'd written it off because I'd been known to go a little bit silly. And but I'd clean swapped it for
the crane?
For the crane, because he'd never had a new car in his life.
Oh, okay.
And they're about the same value, so we had a clean swap, and that's what got me started in the cranes. And that was, I started with the crane in February 1990, and I've had the business here in Levin with different cranes.
So how do you get to work? Do you have an advertising somewhere, or do you bring people up saying, listen, I've got a crane, do you want anything done? Or do they come to you, listen, we heard you've just got a new crane, we need this, this and this?
Yeah, well, I was quite lucky. In Levin here, they didn't have a crane at the time, so they had to bring them in either from Palmerston North or Wellington at the time.
So when your crane arrived, so everybody suddenly knows there's a crane in town and you're in business, you're away.
Most people knew. There was quite a lot that didn't.
Yeah.
But prior to me, a few years before I got my crane, Levin was probably in the mid to late 70s. Levin was one of the fastest growing industrial towns in the country.
Wow.
And they did have quite a few cranes here, believe it or not. But at the time when I come here, there was no other crane, and they hadn't had a crane for a little while. So I was lucky enough to start off with a little wee 10-ton crane, of which we done probably 10-ton plus weights.
So was that on a truck or was that on tracks or?
No, it was a little truck crane on a D-series Ford, a little 10-tonner, Australian crane made here in New Zealand, yeah.
So back in the olden days, the cranes have got levers sitting in front of you, and I assume 2 or 3 pedals on the floor.
Yeah, the cranes that I was driving for Richardson's were track machines. They were English Smiths, and they used them for put big drilling rigs up on the jib of them. But they were, there was no computer in them originally whatsoever. You had free fall on the winches, that's what the foot brakes were on the floor, so you could drive with free fall, and if you were drilling a hole, 30 metres into the ground, you lowered people down on the brake, and now they've got to be powered down and powered out, and I do believe that they don't go down pile holes anymore. But
So what you're talking about is a winch?
Yeah, the winch.
Brake controlling a winch.
Freewheeling it,
Yeah, so when if I have a free spool reel, fishing reel, just the round one, and you cast it, but you haven't got your thumb feathering it as it goes, the whole thing just goes.
Yeah.
Does that ever happen to the wire rope when you're free falling?
Not supposed to. But we used to drive piles with a big hammer inside a pipe to drive a pile, and that was all free fall, and you actually got so good at it you wouldn't be using the brake, you'd be able to have a rhythm of doing it. You'd know when it hit and give the little bounce, you'd be picking it back up again.
Oh, okay.
But if you miss doing that, of course you break the wire rope. And so now everything's done set, and it can go up and down hydraulically or whatever.
If you had your life over again, would you do it all again?
I have been so honoured that I've done what I've done, the jobs I've done. I can look at around the country, bridges.
Be very proud of
a whole lot of bridges around the country, people I've met, people I've worked with, and it hasn't been a good clean job. And it's sort of, I would never change nothing.
No, good on you.
Yeah.
So have you got any advice for anybody who's thinking about getting into a career of crane driving or operating?
Yeah, just get in and do it.
Get in and do it. Just do it.
Because I'll tell you what, if you're sitting in the crane, driving the crane, you're a damn sight better off than the joker that's out there placing the panels, because he's out in the rain, you're sitting in the warm.
Fair enough.
And I've got a bit of a motto: I'll do anything for anyone, anywhere, as long as I'm sitting on my backside doing it.
Good on you, Dave.
Yeah.
Yeah, well done.
Right.
There you go, folks. Dave Sales, crane operator.